The following episode is a conversation with myself and Mark Zumansky. We weren't sure if we were going to release it. We decided to record just a little one-on-one brainstorm session that we had just chatting about WordPress. We were recording it. Wasn't sure if we were going to release it. I am going to release it. It's a rather long conversation. Ideas a little bit all over the place, but generally you're talking about who WordPress is for, how we approach the marketing, the messaging around WordPress, who WordPress real quote unquote enemy is in the space, who our competition is, what could bring WordPress down, and all of those fun topics. So sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and kick back to listen to Mark and I chat about some WordPress stuff.
Obviously, we chat via DM quite frequently on different things because you are one of my mentors in this space. Kind of like to run things by you a lot of times when I see them because I know you've been in here for a long time. Just try to get your insights. Obviously, I watch a lot of your content. I think, when was the most recent one where you were talking about like the cycles? Oh, you were with WP Tonic.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the cycles, how you've seen all these things before. So
Sure.
being I like to consider myself some sort of an inquisitive person. I like to think of and utilize the experience of my elders, not to say you're old, but my elders like yourself. So I just like to run things by you. And I guess some of the most recent events that we have seen in the WordPress community were a couple things about like blogging. And I always like to blow it up to bigger concepts. Obviously, we use examples because that's what kind of like triggers the conversation, but just kind of like ways that plugins market their content, different blogging tactics, things like that. Just the messaging surrounding all of that, that's really interesting. And then as a subset, premium versus free tools. That I feel like would be more directed towards people that are actually purchasing, right? The end users or the agencies. That's another big topic that has been on my mind recently. Have some thoughts there. And then also just in general, kind of how we're navigating this. I think I had another thought. It was just like thinking about the end user versus thinking about like developers in the community in a sense, because those are two vastly different audiences. And I feel like a lot of times we're thinking like we're doing something good for one party, but we're actually the other party and we don't have the proper perspective. So I think that's another big thing that we need to continue to navigate in this space.
Let's start with that. Let's start with, so let me return a question back to you. Are you saying we're having that same discussion of who is WordPress for? Is when you were thinking about that last question, are you thinking like, oh man, we're still stuck in the throes of who is this for? How do we talk to these end users? If it's for like the basic blogger or website builder, are we even using that kind of copy to reach these people? Like, how does that break down in your head?
I think that what I see is that there's a lot of speculation and just I feel like you feel that something is one way, so then you say it's one way. And I'm probably guilty of this. I'm just trying to observe because I would like to move forward in the most productive way possible surrounding this. I feel like this is a real fundamental block. So to kind of answer your question, I don't necessarily know per se who WordPress is for. If I was thinking about how to solve that or figure that answer out, it would pretty be relatively simple. I just don't know if we can because I've kind of posed the question before. It's like if there's 800 million websites, WordPress installs, then I feel like it would just be simple to know how many of those were like single individuals building like one, maybe two websites, right? You're building the website to build the website versus you're building the website to make money and build other people's websites. It's really as broken down as I could say it. So if we just say pros is anybody that's building websites for other people, and DIYers are people that are just building websites basically for themselves, if we could get any sort of data on that, then we could easily know who the majority is. I feel like the majority might actually be the DIY crew, but I don't actually know. And either way is fine. I don't really care either way. I just would love to know that. And then from there, the question is, okay, well, if the platform is for them, that's totally fine. But we need to make sure we're talking to them and getting their opinions, because they're not going to be building the platform, but they could be shaping it if we actually get their insight. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's for them. Don't you want to know what your audience needs, wants, and everything like that? I'm not saying we're not doing any of this. I'm just saying that that's kind of the topic, I feel like, because there's a lot of conversations that seem like we're not doing that in a way.
Right. And you think that based on some of the stuff that you've seen lately, let's say, free versus commercial plugins or some of this content marketing stuff, you think that has a direct effect, or these are just unrelated topics that you're just curious about?
I mean, they're all related in the sense of their WordPress, and you have to navigate these things if you're in this space, because it is like robust yet, complex. It's a lot of benefits, a lot of pros, a lot of cons. But the free versus premium thing is, the way I would relate that is that if you are a DIYer, you may want the cheapest solution all the time, and that may work for you. But as soon as you start building websites for other agencies, I went through it myself because we're all DIYers at one point. As soon as you start building websites for other people, then you have to start to consider, well, I am making money from this. It just becomes more of a business conversation. I'm making money from this. Do I want more headaches? Do I want more hiccups? People don't think about like the longevity of the product. It's business. People are not going to continue to build XYZ form plugin, XYZ page builder without being compensated, So I feel like those are kind of like 202 topics but they really start to rear their head when you start to actually consider what you should be doing from a non-DIY perspective. So again, it's two separate conversations, but it kind of all blends together as far as, whether you should choose free or paid or when or why and those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, I still, for me, the end user is still largely going to be that DIY person.
Mm-hmm. But can you define that? Can you define that for me, though? What your definition of that is?
Well, I mean, I would say it is anyone who wanted to get a website up that just wanted to literally do it themselves, and it
Right.
could range from, I don't know, it could range from you're in business and you're selling pottery and you're trying to get something off the ground. You are just somebody who likes to put up photos. You're a photographer. You're a blogger. I think the depth of end user for WordPress is just so deep. The difference is many of them are coming through. Well, they all. 99.9% of them are all coming through a web hosting company. So, those web hosts are largely the ones responsible for recruiting and retaining these types of end users. So, if you're trying to figure out like how or what types of customers these are, because we don't have the data, it's to look to, in a way that I would look at it, is look at the largest web hosts in the world and look at their marketing and how they try to attract, users. There are plenty of people who, and then there's massive percentage of people who just don't even know it's WordPress, don't care, don't know that they're even using WordPress. And that is either because they just literally aren't paying attention, like they're just literally not paying attention when they're building this website that they signed up for, and somebody just threw WordPress at them like a web host, or there's some layer of software on top of this stuff. And it is a massively fragmented space, and I don't think we'll ever have the definite answer of like hard percentages. You can just try to summarize how many websites you've launched, how many websites other professionals have launched, and try to get an idea of, for the professional WordPress community, like the ones who are always talking about it every day, of how many websites they're responsible for launching. And it's a massive amount too, right? The professionals in the WordPress space. So it's just a tough one to crack. And I don't know if anyone has any other ways of calculating that data other than looking at the web hosts and trying to understand, who the biggest web hosts are hosting WordPress and seeing how they attract customers to kind of reverse engineer potentially that type of customer. That's the best that I have to try to answer that.
So then if we define that, if that's our definition of end user, somebody that needs a website for either business or blog, but they're not really at the level, or they don't want to get somebody to do that, right? They're not going to hire somebody, they're going to do it themselves, which in 2024, we are definitely lying to ourselves if we don't think that's like possible, or we don't think that's like a good idea. I mean, it's definitely a good idea. Even though I want people to, come to my agency and have me build them a website, I do think that, we don't work with everybody, and there's a certain level there, and it's just interesting to see how it's gone. So I think that, with the Gutenberg project as an example, and I wasn't really in this, frame of mind when this all started, right? And you were. So tell me about this. What was the initial thought there to be like, we see where this is going. We see that it's getting like easier for the common person to build. So we're going to try to move in that direction. And again, I don't know where Wix and Squarespace and all those were at that point, but it was the idea to go that route so we could kind of compete, if that's, if we want to use that term, with those types of things, because I do think that makes sense. But was that any of the, would you say, did it sound like that was the reason, or did we just think in general like that was the way to go? Or
well, I mean, you also have to consider the complexities of the of the situation. Meaning, it's not like we all got together and decided, Gutenberg was the path. I mean, I think, this is going to go counter to a lot of the stuff I've told you before. So try to take it with a grain of salt. I think every great product, let me zoom out. So I've worked at companies before where the founders don't care about the product. They don't care about the product. They don't use it. They're not passionate about it. They don't understand it from a customer's point of view.
What do they care about? Just the money?
Just like the business side of it. Like I've got this cog, and can I sell it? And profitability, and plenty of businesses run that way, and that's totally fine, right? Totally fine. I mean, it's business, right? And a lot of people see business on paper and numbers, and that's it, and that's fine. That's probably how a majority of the world operates, And then you have software that it's a unique animal, because software companies can be one person. And generally, that's one person that is super passionate about a thing, and they can become multimillionaires, and they can have hundreds of thousands of customers. They can be one person. I mean, there's plenty of case studies around that. So the software business, and then you look at the WordPress world, it's very unique that 5, 6, 7, a dozen people can come together and build something awesome and be super profitable for it, and yada, yada, yada. So having said all of that, there needs to be, in this space, a good product leader, and to make decisions. Any business needs that for the product. Somebody needs to say, I love this thing enough to make a decision. Because what I was getting at with those other businesses is no decisions are made. You're just coasting along. We don't even know what the hell we're building. We don't know any of this stuff. And in the WordPress world, the person who makes that decision, whether you agree with the decisions or not, are largely led by Matt Mullenweg's vision, right? Now, when you date way back into the WordPress world, and the reason why I have always, the reason why I latched onto WordPress early on was he had a vision of WordPress becoming the operating system of the web. Now, he never really broke that apart and dissected it, nor was it ever really just it was never like a thing that they flew on a flag and everyone was like, woohoo, we're all going to build like the operating system of the web. I heard it and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I kind of like that idea, because back then page builders weren't a thing. It was custom post types, custom fields. You were building user logins. I was doing that at my agency. We're building these little mini apps, and I was like, oh yeah, WordPress is kind of like this application layer. We talked about this before. That was a debate many years ago people would debate forever, is WordPress really just an application framework? And that was like massive debate for a while. So Mullenweg is the one who kind of rolled out the concept of Gutenberg. Now, you can debate whether or not it was the right decision to make. You can debate whether or not there's massive like accessibility issues with it. Presumably there might still be issues with it today. All this stuff. It was where the web was going from an end user's perspective.
Yeah, but defining that though, the way it was going, the vision, everything like that, we literally mean going from like a WYSIWYG classic type editor style and things like that, just like being dropped into pages via themes, to a visual building. Like that's what we're talking about, right? Exactly. I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, we could have a separate discussion about that, but everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? Like it does seem like it is trending that way. It's way easier to build when you can actually see the stuff rather than, again, it's more encapsulation, abstraction away from the actual, coding of it. But again, democratizing publishing, I don't really think too many people would take like issue with that. Obviously it gets into more nuance as far as like how it's gone and things, but that's not really even where I'm at right now. My thought is, okay, so what was it, 5 years ago?
Roughly.
Ish?
Yeah.
Okay. So 5 years ago, we make that turn. I would love to go back in time, maybe, like where the other platforms were at that point, regardless of if it's a competition or not. In a sense, I do believe it kind of is, because at the end of the day, if I am a layperson, this is the whole concept right here, is if I'm a layperson, I don't know 1% of the shit you and I know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know anything. And I think I don't know if we actively forget about this or if it's just a passive thing, but because we're kind of in the space, I'm talking in general, but you and I as an example, like, because I do it, I think we forget about the actual end users and what they do or don't know. And if the goal is to get more like random, pottery people or blog people onto the WordPress platform, that is, I feel like there's a bit of a struggle there. And I think Gutenberg is starting to solve that. Jamie Marsland, those types of videos, fantastic. So I still think that like the actual product then, and this is another question I don't think I've got an answer to, is has anybody gone to a pottery or a blogger person or something and literally asked them, does this make any sense to you? Would you guys use this thing?
Yeah.
Like compared to like a Wix or a Squarespace or whatever? That's all I'm saying on that point, because I feel like just from straight up like thinking about how to sell this project to them and get them to try it, that's kind of the best thing. And again, I shout out Jamie because he's making fantastic videos about that specifically. He's even doing addwordpress.com now. So I definitely think we're moving in the right direction. Definitely optimistic. I'm just trying to kind of recalibrate my mind on that front too, to see how I could be continuing to do better, think about it differently, and how we could continue to move forward.
Yeah, it's also again, it's difficult because of the sheer size of WordPress. And, one of the benefits still with open source and with WordPress is, effectively, if there were, because there is, like, if you look at, there's a market for restaurants, right? I mean, when I got into the agency game, probably just like when you got into the agency game, maybe probably the first thought that came through your head is like, all these restaurant websites are terrible. I'm going to go help people build restaurant websites. And then you go talk to the restaurant owners and they look at you and they say, get the hell out of my kitchen. I work 70 hours a week. I don't have time to do this website thing. And then you realize why restaurant websites suck. Yeah. Right. But
which has evolved. That has evolved as well. I don't want to go on for restaurant tangent, but like now there's like online ordering and like you obviously can do that through WordPress, but that was a really, really good thing that people like came up with, a good idea to make, platforms specifically for that. Now every restaurant website looks like kind of one or two different ways or whatever, but that's a side note. But that's one of the examples though.
And sure. if you look at like WordPress, to just use a different analogy that I don't often use on like the WordPress open source side of it, is it's the open highway, and then your different cars can come drive on this highway. So, WordPress effectively can build you a 50,000 foot view page builder. I know it's not trying to do that, but if you zoom out, like if it stays out of the way and builds you the infrastructure you need to have a good page building experience or content editing experience, then if the market demands more pottery type solutions, then somebody will come up with Pottery themes, Pottery plugins, Pottery services, and that's the benefit of this whole like open source thing. Because if somebody's truly being underserved here through WordPress, chances are you can find somebody to fill that gap. You see it now. Well, you see it now with services agencies. That's why there's so many services agencies that invest in WordPress, but then you see it more thoroughly with like higher ed solutions where they have a specific need for WordPress, and there are agencies out there and software out there that like bends to that market. Same thing with publishing, magazine, like traditional magazines, traditional news publishers. I went to a competitor the other day as a side thing. There's a pretty popular magazine in my area. They always do like the top restaurants, top stores for all the 2024 and all the categories. And I used to manage their site. I actually built them all kinds of stuff way back in the day. Then magazines stopped getting funded or whatever, and they cut their budgets down, tried to bring it in-house. There was a problem with their website the other day, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they still run WordPress. So I went /WP admin. They do. And somebody rebranded the WP admin interface. And I don't know what the name of the website was, but it goes to some other website. And they just talk about how like they've built a CMS for media publishers and all this other stuff. And I'm like, guys, this is still WordPress here. Yeah. So, that's the benefit with WordPress is it can be, molded to that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's different depending on what you obviously want, but I still think that I just think that's.
Let me ask you this: so why do you think if you all of a sudden had a chart of the breakdown of end users, would you do anything different?
I feel like it would matter what the results were to a certain degree.
You think that would make the software better if we could really pin down who that was?
I think it's an interesting one that calls for an analogy that maybe you and I could come up with, because I don't have one off the top of my head, but it's the way I see it is we have talented developers that are in the space all the time creating the software for people that are going to use it, but again, literally, do we have any focus groups of those things? I mean, how do regular SaaS products work? Did they get feedback from their user base? Like they're it's just different because there's too many different types of people utilizing it. Like for instance, my fintech bank that I've used since they basically opened, I was like one of the core people, and I was like giving feedback on what was going on and UI changes and things. But I'm the only person that's using it. I'm not the only person. I'm the only avatar that's using it, right? They don't really have too many other avatars, but in WordPress, there's a ton of people. I'm not saying these are easy questions to answer. I'm just saying that, I like if we literally just rounded up 100 pottery people and we said to them, hey, threw Gutenberg in front of them and said, hey, I feel like that might be a good thing too, just to kind of see what the vibe is like. But then, I mean, again, I'll counter my own argument. Does it even matter? Do we just feel like we know what's best for them and we just put it in front of them and then they handle and they figure it out themselves? That could be an answer. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and that's something I can't answer either because of, the various decisions and the various concepts that come into the WordPress space. The core team and a lot of people who contribute to actual code to WordPress, some of these ideas just come out of nowhere, right? And some of these big concepts just come out of nowhere. And obviously the biggest fish in the game is Automattic. So, you have some smart people there and certainly can lead you to say, like, why did we come up with this idea? I would hope that when they're making those decisions. So this goes back to what I was saying before about, like, you need to have a product person. I know not to call WordPress a traditional product, but you need to have a product person who makes those decisions, makes those bets. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have somebody who's like willing to risk that or have that vision, then you get nothing. You just get the stagnant product or company. So Gutenberg, big grand vision. Matt has even said before in other podcasts or other interviews that he actually sees open source Gutenberg to be bigger than WordPress in years to come. So wrap your head around that, right? And I kind of agree with him on that. You know, other CMS platforms should use Gutenberg. Ghost should use Gutenberg because Ghost is a great platform, but when you start editing, it's so limited compared to what I can do with Gutenberg when I'm building pages and templates. And that's the idea around Gutenberg. That's also an open source project that other CMSs or any interface that has inputs on the web could fork and use in their project. So you need somebody to be able to make those decisions. So I hope that when, you know, Matthias and Rich Tabor and Ann McCarthy and all these folks that come up with a lot of Nick Diego, come up with these big grand visions of WordPress, that they're thinking this decision is good for everyone. It's a bit of risk. It's a bit of a bet, as a good product person should do. But the idea would be like, hey man, if this isn't working, you gotta yank it, or we gotta shift course. And a little bit of hint of that this past week, when Matt was like, maybe we should take a year and reinvest in stuff. Yeah, man, like maybe we have been iterating too fast. And actually we kind of just saw this happen because I believe collaboration was next on the list, but that's getting paused because there wasn't enough either interest, or maybe they realized like, oh shit, we have to pump the brakes a bit and beef up this other stuff before we start thinking about developing collaboration in WordPress. And that's going to get pushed to a later date, I believe, is what the end result was.
Yeah, I mean, that would just be another question that I would have. Is it that the iteration has been too fast, or has it been some other like word? I mean, like, because again, there's different opinions all over the community about this. Some people say it's not been managed well. Some people say it's going slow as hell, like all that sort of stuff. I'm not here to say one way or the other necessarily. I haven't been around long enough to really feel it. But I'm saying like how it signals to me like there's, just looking at it, that if it was too fast and we need to go back on certain things, then maybe those weren't completely thought out at the time. And either not completely thought out or not completely, I don't know the process for building a SaaS, I'm not going to lie, but I'm thinking, like, I don't see other, again, we can't really compare, I guess, products to projects, but I don't really see that happening in these other platforms. So I wonder, literally, I know it's not apples to apples entirely, but I'm wondering, like, with a Wix, with a Squarespace, like, how do they even come up with these ideas? Do they poll their users at all? Do they have those types of focus group type things? Because we have like the greatest community of that in WordPress, but it is not really the target audience of traditional WordPress, I suppose. Like, you can just open up Twitter and you will see an opinion about Gutenberg or WordPress in general or something like that, but that person is most likely going to be somebody that does this professionally, rather than, or has some sort of livelihood connected directly to the product and the project, rather than just like their business uses WordPress. Yeah, I just think it's a really, really interesting juxtaposition that we're here.
I mean, I would even argue that if you saw a negative opinion about WordPress, you would see more negative opinions about WordPress from the average user than you would positive, reviews, because it's still a learning curve and it's still difficult, and you need to have some knowledge to know how this whole thing is put together, right? Plugins, themes, what can, hosting, what happens when my site goes slow. Like, you need to, that's why people reach out to a service provider. And I think that really it's understanding, and this is why I think secretly you start to, not secretly, but you start to see efforts with playground.wordpress.net and the Studio app, because this gives somebody the ability to use WordPress and try WordPress for free. Now, we're in infant stage right now. This tiny little blip on the radar right now. But 6 months ago, 10 years ago, when you told somebody to get WordPress, it was download the zip file. What do you do with it? Now you can actually try it for free in the browser. And that's not going to help everyone, but it'll certainly onboard people faster, because one, you can do it for free and you can do it without any risk. Like, it's not like you're breaking anything. It's not like you have to save this somewhere kind of thing. You don't have to break your website. And I think that that's going to be the start to get people onboarded. And ultimately, at the end of the day, ultimately at the end of the day, it is what it is. Like if people can't figure out WordPress on their own, like that DIYer, that you always have in this free open market, not just open source, but open market, you'll have those other solutions of Wix and Squarespace. So like their market share is basically people who are just frustrated with WordPress at the end of the day. Not literally, but there's a large portion who are like, I don't want to do this myself. Give me this app that's $10 a month that looks like it's good, looks like what I have, and there's tech support. And that's a total viable solution. And WordPress.com exists for that reason too, but they're their own worst enemy because if somebody onboards through WordPress.org and they hate that experience through some like $5 a month cheap hosting plan, then that person just says, oh, I don't care if WordPress.com is the place to go. I don't want WordPress. I'm going to Squarespace and Wix. Until they level up in their business life or they realize, oh shit, I can't do what I need to do with this website. And then they move back to WordPress or something else.
Yeah, it's tough. I feel like there's a piece of it that's what is louder versus what is true in just a general opinion of everything, because I feel like a lot of people would question that idea of just simply, like you just brought up there, like .com versus .org. What's the purpose of either? Who are they being marketed to and things like that? And I'm just not sure because I hear a lot of opinions, but then it doesn't get reflected in like the way that it's actually, either updated, iterated on, or what have you. And I don't know if there's an actual. These are some of the toughest questions I feel like in this whole space, just because there's too many opinions. There's too many things.
What do you get out of it if you get an answer?
I mean, I don't know if I would get anything out of it, but hopefully
I was just curious.
Impacts some change, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but change for what? Like, what is it going to change? Like, what change are you looking for?
Well, I don't know if I'm looking for a particular change, but I will say that things are absolutely going to change. Like for instance, so like you talked about AI recently. I know you have some opinions on that versus like professional
AI website building.
Yeah, AI website building and like that versus professional themes and things. And I'm like, I'm very interested to see where that goes. Like I am like, I don't know if I'm optimistic or pessimistic on it, but like I think people are trying to like that is like a real concern. Like we could be having another chat in 5 years and this is like incredibly different. Now, you can't predict that for sure.
100%.
But
right.
It's like, I don't know. I feel like if the DIYers are the main audience, I would be like on them like a hawk, seeing like what they actually want to do. And I don't know if you can because you don't have like direct access per se to them, which I get that. But it's a real question. And then the last point was, I kind of forgot and now I'll come back to it, is WordPress the end? Is it the end solution? Meaning, does somebody go to get marketed to a Wix or a Squarespace? It's real easy. Because I could see that as one of the journeys, the customer journeys, where they go there and then they get limited and then they're like, hey, go to WordPress or have somebody build you a WordPress website because there's a lot more that you can do. We all know that and we say that. And it's like, how do we actually communicate that where, hey, if you just maybe started on WordPress, I know it might be a little annoying, but just learn Gutenberg and then you're going to be like way better off because you're already going to be kind of settled in this ecosystem. If you ever need to hand it off, it's going to be, you're not going to be limited anyway. They're all business decisions though for people that are literally running businesses outside of the tech space most of the time. So it's a really hard conversation to actually have.
You'd have to have, if the DIY segment, you have to define and refine and all that stuff because there are business owners that will roll up their sleeves because literally they don't have the money to hire somebody right now. So they'll roll up their sleeves and they'll try to get it done, right? I mean, you would imagine that's the type of person they are if they're going to start a business. And then eventually business grows, yada, 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 the whole story. And then they say it's time to hire a professional. Hopefully, well, maybe they're happy with a Squarespace and Wix type solution. So they hire a Squarespace and Wix specialist and they design them a site and they're happy. It's the different kind of site that is doing probably more like publishing, obviously something leveraging custom post types and archives. If you have a lot of, tons of content or data on your site, complex workflows, all this other stuff. And that's when they say, okay, these platforms can't help me with that. I'll go hire a professional. Or they interview people and somebody convinces them to use WordPress, right? And I think that's why when you saw Josefa talk about like the next steps for the community, this is something that, I've been holding on to for all of 2024, because end of 2023, the next thing now is is WordPress thriving? We have to keep asking ourselves that as good stewards of the community. Is WordPress thriving? Not just the software, but the people are in it and around it. Are we encouraging ourselves to, reinvest back into WordPress, learn WordPress, educate others on WordPress, etc.? And, that's another segment for growth. And I think Josefa and team, including Matt, realize that you don't want to lose the community because if you lose the community, it's a slow erosion effect. And there's all kinds of issues right now in that with WordPress, age, the software itself is also aging. The users are aging. And when you look at AI, certainly, and who the hell knows? 5 years could be drastically different, or it could not, but drastically different, like where people can write their own code and ChatGPT just ships it off to a hosting platform. You don't even know, nor do you care. You say, build me a blogging system where my 5 colleagues can log in and blog, and it just builds the whole system for you. Now, maybe Matt's vision of WordPress and Gutenberg is that there's a way that code is being used in AI algorithms and it's putting together the underpinnings of WordPress, and Gutenberg is a standalone project. So that stuff is just, AI knows Gutenberg and it's building you these bespoke platforms using Gutenberg. That sounds pretty cool. Whether or not that happens, I have no freaking idea, but it is definitely a risk to WordPress. But don't forget, if it's not just a risk to WordPress with 48% of the content marketing space, content management space, it's a risk to all these other platforms that have 1% and are charging people. It's a closed commercial system. So who's at risk more, Wix and Squarespace or WordPress? Yeah, but anyway, at the end of the day, AI site building is very underwhelming for me.
Do you think it's a fair statement to say that the only thing that can kill WordPress is WordPress itself?
No, because I think there is definitely a threat from, AI, and there's definitely threats from other open source platforms. Shopify is a threat. I don't see it as, I don't see an ending for WordPress. I don't think anything is as drastic as an ending to WordPress. It might fall out of popularity, but I don't see it being like dethroned completely, because there are open source tools and packages that people have been using for decades at this point. People are definitely still using IRC in chat rooms, versus social media. So, I don't see it as grim as an outcome to WordPress.
How did the initial run up, how did that happen with WordPress? Like when you were going through that and you were like, I guess you were seeing like that kind of happen. What were like maybe the top couple reasons why you think that WordPress got to 43%?
Oh, largely because of, number one, open source. A lot of it, and this is just my perspective, I'm sure other people have different perspectives, but open source, number one. Number two, giving the credit back to Matt in the early days, you had somebody willing to pursue blogging and building out a blogging platform. And that was right place, right time, because blogging was the thing. It was pre-social media, and it started to become a site builder, to a degree back then, because people kind of just only knew websites as very complex things or things that had text on it. So if you could build this thing that helped you publish things with text on it, you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. And yeah, just so many other factors. Technology was getting better, faster, cheaper every day. It was really like the perfect storm to build this publishing tool. And that ramped up with the rest of the economy of web design, where you front page, Corel had website building tools. Apple had PageMill. I don't remember what it was. Apple had, it was a whole market. Adobe, Flash, like the consumer internet was happening. It was just perfect storm to get all these things going. And then you had the financial crisis of 2008, where that's when I started our agency. I didn't lose a job. We used to run car dealerships. We sold our dealerships because General Motors was going bankrupt. And then we started our agency. But you also had so many people so many agencies that are still in business today in the WordPress space started back then as well, because they were leaving their jobs or their job got shut down. So everybody kind of turned to this boom of WordPress because it was amazing. For that kind of technology, it was amazing to start a services business back then. And you saw it again with COVID, right? All of a sudden, the jump in themes, plugins, WordPress hosting just freaking went off the charts because everyone was like, what do I do? I lost my job. I want to do something, or I have a business and I need to start selling shit online. So another boom because of like the economy. So there was a lot of stuff, at play. And again, back to the open source side of it, if it were like commercial out of the gate, you would not have seen it. It would have never spread. And then compound the community and all of us spreading the knowledge of WordPress. That's why it's grown, in my opinion.
Okay. So right place, right time.
Yeah, just like a lot of other things. Yeah. And Drupal was massive back then too. Drupal and WordPress was the arms race. And Drupal just did not win out. It was much more complex. It was looked at much more of an enterprise type solution. And it was built with that mindset. And that's actually that would add, that could be a whole documentary unto itself. But I was big in the Drupal. I came into this whole market through Drupal. And it wasn't for the designer that I was working with who was like, Drupal's terrible to design with. I need this thing called WordPress. WordPress is way better. And the Drupal Con, I forget what year I went, 2003, 2004. I can't remember. It was in Boston. It was freaking massive. But it was very, very corporate, like right out of the gate. And I think because of that, and because the company Acquia, like Dries Butart, who's the founder of Drupal, he started a company called Acquia, and it was very much more enterprisey than Automattic was when Matt Mullenweg started Automattic. And I think that was a perfect example of they had so many enterprise type clients and they catered to that market that's the lane that Drupal stayed in. Still is. And WordPress was much more like, Mullenweg was just like, freedom, man. Everybody wants a blog, dude. And Dries became much more of a corporate entity. And I remember I was there when they announced Acquia, and people, I'm pretty sure I heard boos come out of the crowd because you had a bunch of like open source developers who were like, no, this is not what we want. We don't want to commercialize this software. And they did. And that was a path that they stuck to.
So was it open source to begin with, you're saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, still is.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, it's commercialized in a sense. It's quite the ride.
What else you got? You want to touch on the free versus paid stuff?
We can do that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like free versus paid specifically with I don't know, which way do we want to go here? Because again, I'm thinking of it from a different angle, but I don't know what questions you have, or where would you start? What's your
what's your angle? You said you said it could take a whole seminar for free versus paid, or something like that. You said something. Like that.
So like free versus paid plugins, like with I don't know, just my opinion, my lived experience, and what I see with other people is that WordPress is fantastic because it is open source. It is more or less free to kind of like get started with, and you could spin up a blog just paying for hosting and things like that. I think the idea of having 50,000 or so whatever plugins in the repository is in a lot of ways awesome, and in a lot of ways potentially obviously scary for a litany of reasons. But you don't obviously, if you, again, this is the whole thing, is you have to almost like go through the gauntlet to know some of these things. If you're a DIYer, like if you're a DIYer and you just search, okay, I'm making my pottery website, I have no idea how to put a form on here, I gotta type in, give me a free like forms on WordPress or something, or maybe there's something that's kind of already in there, I don't know, but like you have to like type in forms into the plugin repo. I remember doing this and I'm like, okay, I have no idea what any of these are. Am I going to go cross-reference these? Am I just going to whatever? So then you pick any free one, and then you have something in there. If it does the job, that's cool. If you need something more at some point, maybe you pay for that one, or maybe you find a different one. So it's like really cool that that's an option. But for DIYers, I don't even know how we talk about it, because most of the time they're probably like, I don't know at what point you get to as a DIYer where you're like actively going to pay for something that you can't like directly see the value prop for. If it was like some sort of software, that premium plugin that was specific for that and there was no free option, maybe. But that's one piece of it. And then the second part of it, though, is the way that I think more is like, I'm building websites for other people. So, and I'm managing those websites. I just literally don't want to use a bunch of free plugins, because not that there's anything wrong with free plugins, but it's probably going to limit me in some capacity. It's probably going to be somewhat less supported it's going to be less funded because it's free, most likely, unless it has a premium counterpart that's whatever, that's generating revenue and things. But the other thing is, I just want to have like less headaches in a way, and that is too much of a generalization, because some free plugins are perfect, it'll never give you any trouble. But that's the way that I think, and I feel like if I'm paying, then I ought to be receiving better service. I ought to be having less problems, and I have a reason to actually complain if that does happen. So it's really it's a two-sided thing, just because of the nature of WordPress. But that's kind of the high level of like free versus paid. I feel like a lot of like, it's different for everyone, but if you're building for other people, I feel like there's definitely an argument to choose premium more so than free stuff if necessary.
Yeah. I mean, it's two different problems, right? So if you say, the end user has issues, difficulty navigating the plugin repository, absolutely. Right? I think everyone, agrees on that. And that's a whole, conundrum onto itself. We've seen plenty of issues. We talked about this last time. Back in the day, themes, you could just put your theme up there. If you review the most themes, that would get you hundreds of thousands of dollars in sales per year from having that top spot, that exposure. Plugins, same thing. Once you got into the plugin repo, effectively you could be. This has been an issue for many years, and I think it's a lot better now. But there was a time where, man, once you got past the initial check of the plugin review team, once you were in, you could just change your plugin and do whatever the hell you wanted to do, and get away with stuff, little upsells, little nagging upsells, right? In terms of commercializing the software. Whereas themes was always different. Every time you made a every time you made a commit to the theme, they would review it before it would, go live. So there was always this debate of, wow, why do the themes get treated different than the plugins? Well, because there's so many more plugins, and plugins has so much more code than themes. So there's just not enough manpower. Then that would snowball in, well, what are we doing here? Why not make us... And you just saw this. Envato sold to Shutterstock for $250 million or whatever the number was. Envato and ThemeForest was massive back 2008, 2012. Like, their run was ridiculous. And people would always say, well, look at this theme space marketplace over here. Why can't we have that at WordPress.org? And that's still a debate for some. Like, why not have verified users, little check mark next to your name? Why can't we have better support? Why can't we have better data? So yeah, like, improving that experience has always been a thing. One, I think just not enough. It's just the sheer structure and manpower that would take. You got to remember, WordPress.org is a nonprofit. It's not a commercial entity. So it's not like, oh yeah, we'll just hire a bunch of people and just do it. There could be a way to do it, and everybody would be taxed, just like you're taxed at Apple, 30%. But the distribution channel is pretty massive. So I had always said back when I was selling themes and plugins, tax me. I want a trusted distribution channel, and that would have been the place. That's one half of your question. The other half of the question is, yeah, man, picking free versus commercial. A good agency owner or service person should always be looking to, hedge their business continuity or whatever you want to call it, right? So very important plugins, page builders, forms, themes, whatever it is that you're e-commerce, other things that are in there that are like detrimental to your support of a customer. Absolutely, you should have a commercial license to get that commercial support. Trusted, reliable, and works with the business. And that makes total sense, because the last thing you want to do is sell a big client project and then you're just using some throwaway plugin that breaks the site, and then there's no support, and then you have to go back to tell. And this was very, very prominent on the Theme Forest / Code Canyon days, because again, I've told this story before. One of the low-hanging fruit customers we used to go after too were real estate agents. Still, shitty websites today, shitty websites back then. And what did we do? We used business directory plugins off of Envato, because I was foolish. And I was like, oh, yeah, $59 for this thing? Absolutely. And it's somebody in some unknown place in the world who's coded it, and then it doesn't work, or the code is terrible, and there's no documentation, and then we're stuck holding the bag going, oh, yeah, your site keeps crashing because you have too many real estate listings and this plugin just simply can't handle it. Or there's some rogue like memory leak in the PHP and it's crashing the hosting. Now, again, this was a long time ago, so those were big issues back then, probably less today. But yeah, it was the worst, because then you're like, God damn, you knew every weekend the site was going to crash, right? They're doing an open house, the site's going to crash. And that was poor code and somebody you're not getting support from. But there were solutions for many hundreds of dollars that serviced that market. And I was like, no, I wasn't selling projects for high enough dollars to justify that fee. Certainly wasn't going to pass it on to my client, because I was trying to be the person who was just like, no, we're doing it all ourselves, man. We got it. This is us. We're custom coders. And that's early days. And then you learn your lessons, and then you start to understand, oh, people don't care about the code. They want professional support. So add another 0 at the end. Tell them that you'll be there for them, and be honest, and the world's a better place. And, those are lessons that, I learned the hard way in the early days.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've started there as well. I think everyone does with the free side of things, just because it's very easily accessible. But yeah, I mean, just for me, it was honestly, a lot of times it was a limitation thing, because I couldn't do something with a free tool whenever I wanted to do, and then I would rank up. And obviously the support is huge as well when you're trying to deal with other clients. But again, it's two different problems for two different avatars, and I don't know if that's ever going to be something that, I don't know. I feel like I'd be interested to do a deep dive on any other platform as well. We talked to Sam about Webflow. I wonder how they handle end users' concerns versus agency concerns, or if they're just not at the scale that it actually matters.
It doesn't matter.
You can hear it.
It doesn't matter, because every one of their users is paid. Right? So remember, WordPress.org doesn't make a dime. Mm-hmm. There's that kind of, that just doesn't exist in the WordPress.org world. No one at WordPress.org is actively thinking, are we going to make payroll this month? Do we have to, what do we have to do to keep this business going? It's a very, very different animal. Whereas Webflow is constantly looking at the competition, marketing, sales, adding features, charging people $15,000 for bandwidth, their business model is completely different. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of your concerns and questions would be smoothed over when we see the day that Automattic becomes much more the front runner for WordPress. And oh, by the way, get WordPress. You can get a free version of WordPress at wordpress.org. Like that'll be the thing that really changes like the way this is all perceived, because I honestly think that at some point Automattic needs to be much more profitable in the face of all these other hosting companies in order to survive. And you will see, I said this before countless times, you will see get WordPress at wordpress.com, get WordPress wherever you want to host your, just like we say, listen to your podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Run this WordPress website wherever you run WordPress websites with Jetpack. And then in an 8-point font below that, download your version of WordPress for free. Right? Like the open source version that we know today.
Is how, help me understand how that situation is different than the one you outlined with Drupal.
It's not. It's the same. It's not the future. I'm not looking forward to it. Right? I just think that that's going to be the only path really that Automattic can go in the future, unless Matt comes up with some amazing, idea. But this is why he gets so crazy about places like GoDaddy, who make billions of dollars on web hosting, much more than Automattic does, and all these other web hosts, because they're making a lot more money than Automattic hosting.
With that, the way that I interpret that, like reading into all of that, is obviously open source and closed source things have their own inherent problems and stuff. But is that a separate concern? Is WordPress being open source? Is this get conflated too often, where like the idea that it's open source is inherently hurting or benefiting what we just talked about there? Is that a different, do you understand what I'm saying? Is that a different concern? Like open source is a category of literally just like code, right? It just means like you could fork the code, or the code's proprietary, like proprietary versus not proprietary, more or less, right? Like that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, there's legalities around it, like the GPL license. Like you can't.
Right.
Yeah, but it does not hurt. It does not hurt it for sure.
Well, what I'm saying though is like a private company can be running a open source project.
Automattic is the example. Right.
So that's not, those two things aren't like mutually exclusive. You can't like, it doesn't have to go one way or the other. It doesn't have to be are you saying that WordPress.org being a nonprofit doesn't have to be like that? Or?
Yeah. So other examples, Red Hat Linux, Ubuntu Linux, same thing. They all have open source is just, well, I say it's just, but in terms of business, it is a particular, it's not really a business model, but it's something that you can do in business. Yeah. Android is open source, right?
That's what I think is the distinction is open source, because it sounds like it to some people, and I've often conflated it. Open source, the specific distinction is open source is not a business model. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Right. It is just the categorization and classification of the project or the product or whatever, right? So it's
and you can actually see the code.
Exactly, that's what I mean.
How it's built.
Proprietary or patented or some shit like
proprietary,
whatever.
Yep.
Proprietary would be the antonym of open source.
Yeah.
So that's your project, your code base, whatever is open source or proprietary. But then your business doesn't have to be, the business model would be, or business type would be like for profit or non-profit. Those two things are separate things. Like you could have a for-profit business running an open source project. You could have a non-profit business. Well, I guess you probably couldn't have a non-profit business running a proprietary product.
It wouldn't be like the classification of business. Your question really would be, how does that business make money? And it's very easy, because again, like you look at Red Hat, Ubuntu as two like software open source examples, is you can go and do it yourself, customer, or you pay us to do it. That's the trade-off. The same thing you see with plugins, like free versus paid plugins, is the same thing WordPress could do if they shifted the way if Automattic shifted the way they package themselves, which would be very difficult because the WordPress Foundation theoretically is set up to protect WordPress, the patents or the copyright of WordPress, the logo, the namespace, and WordPress.org. But there could be a world where you see WordPress position itself as, and you kind of see it now with the hosting page. If we go to wordpress.org/hosting, I think finally, I forgot the E in WordPress. Oh, how about that? It redirects it. /hosting. So WordPress.com, I don't know when WordPress.com actually has been on the hosting page, but it's Bluehost, Hostinger, DreamHost, and WordPress, right? And this is another highly debated topic. But the point is WordPress could position itself to say the best place to experience hosted WordPress is WordPress.com. The best way to experience WordPress without WordPress.com is to get it with Jetpack. And then for the rest of you fools, go grab it and download it and host it somewhere else if you want to play with it. But that's the way that big businesses do open source. Here's my free operating system, Red Hat and Ubuntu, Linux. Go run it on your own or pay for the commercial license and we'll support you. It's the same thing that we do with plugins. Get it for free or upgrade here and we'll give you support.
Okay, so then I think the last thing to pull that together then is that why, when we made the comparison between that Automattic, it's already kind of pseudo-led, it seems like, by Automattic, obviously, but like a more front-facing Automattic lead on the WordPress situation, in that reality, compared that to the Drupal reality, why is that reality of WordPress not your favorable outcome, and what would be? That's probably a pretty deep question that we don't have time for. But on the high level.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, on the high level, I still probably would. I would not mind that. I wouldn't mind. I don't care if WordPress did that. It would be, I wouldn't like it from, man, we all kind of feel like we've built this thing together. We've all been around this for so long that it kind of would feel weird to kind of like push aside. Now, of course, we're just theory crafting here. We don't really know like this is going to happen. But if it did, to kind of push aside the free open source side of it and kind of like hide it a little bit, put it in its own little like compartment and be like, yeah, we got this over here. That would kind of feel bad. It would be so hard to do because the community is so large and so vocal. And WordCamps already run through the foundation. Remember, WordCamps are a foundation thing, not an Automattic thing. Okay? It's not an Automattic event. It's a foundation event. So the community is still pretty strong in that space. I would not mind it. I would just not like it. And I would not mind it. What I wouldn't want is for WordPress to be owned by Salesforce. Because forget it. That's the kiss of death. So again, I keep saying this, Automattic is still the best steward for WordPress, even if they position themselves. And I also think that would be the medicine we would all kind of need to swallow to a degree. To be like, yes, we know. You have to monetize to survive. It's the same thing us plugin developers say, right? If you have a free plugin in the repo and people are bashing your free plugin or asking for more, and you're like, well, give me $59, man, and buy a license and I can survive and continue to do this. That's why a lot of people are, should be against the lifetime deals. You saw this with Bricks. They had lifetime deals, but obviously to survive, you got to charge your customers. You need money to come in. And guess what? Those prices should go up. Like I put this out as a poll the other day. How many people have raised their prices in the WordPress space, both on the software side and the hourly pricing side? Because, man, I'm talking to different random-ass contractors, pest control people, right? Squirrels, and then the prices are just outrageous. And they're like, well, the price has gone, everything's so much more expensive. And then I sit here and go, man, I haven't seen a WordPress plugin raise their prices in a decade.
Yeah.
Are the consultants raising their prices? Because, and then the thing that kills me is when these contractors, they don't even get back to you. They don't even care, right? Mm-hmm. Had a guy come, put mulch in my yard, cut my grass, do the spring cleanup, cracked the side of my stairs with his lawnmower. Didn't even tell me. Sent him a message with the photo. Hey, what's up with this stair that you broke? Yeah, I saw that. Couldn't do much about it.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome. I don't go into a client's website, delete a bunch of pages, and then chewing on an apple when they call me up going, hey, what's up with all those pages? Yeah, I deleted them. Sorry. And then just move on with my life. But that's a whole traditional business versus online business because there's so much more competition in our space. I think a lot of people are afraid to go up in price. Customer can just be like, okay, Mark, delete you, move on to the next guy who's going to charge me $50 an hour too. Not saying that that's what you charge, but the idea is all of this stuff is so volatile. Anyway, I forgot where I went or how I got on that, but
well, just a quick point on the pricing thing. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a reasonable person, or from stuff, because I say reasonable, but it's I guess if you're making any money, doing things that we're doing, I always think these are incredible deals. I mean, any plugin for $59 a year, what $200 a year, whatever. I mean, the amount of value that I'm getting out of that software, I'm happy to pay it. And then also, it's if I don't pay it, like you said, it could be gone tomorrow. And now I have to factor in how much time, energy, and money it's going to make to find another, solution that's going to do that because I wasn't paying or they weren't charging me for those types of things. So you really got to think about it a little differently.
That's how I got on that is because I was talking about the survivability of Automattic. Yeah, at some point, Automattic has to start turning, more revenue. Other than that, they just keep going for more investments, and that's just another, slippery slope. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think Matt is trying to outsmart the VCs and be like, I don't need this VC money. I can do this without you. The difference is it just means that he's thinking that WordPress.com and Jetpack are going to be the ways. And he's got WP Cloud now, which is the infrastructure for hosting. So that's another big moneymaker that might soften the blow across all of this stuff. But certainly Jetpack is that's the product. Right? That's the product to monetize all of these free hosted websites everywhere in the world. And it's only going to get more aggressive. But I also don't mind it because I understand you got to eat too.
There's no way to market these things though. There's no way to market as a not even a non-profit. I mean, I'm not saying I don't know if there's a budget or anything, but you have Wix, you have Squarespace and all that sort of stuff. But then you have WordPress.com, which effectively, if positioned correctly and has those standard tools in there, couldn't there be a way where WordPress.com effectively becomes a direct competitor to those types of things with the Gutenberg baked in and all that sort of stuff where it's literally, what does a random person know the difference between Wix and Squarespace? I barely even know the difference. It's they're very
similar. Yeah.
So it's what if we made Gutenberg spearheaded that, made that situation basically the core experience in WordPress. Maybe this is the goal, but the core experience in WordPress is a direct competitor like a Wix and a Squarespace. And then the marketing around that, again, I know there's not necessarily a budget, but then the sentiment, and if we could market it in any way, becomes, hey, come over here because it's kind of the same. Maybe you actually do have better features. You do have more of a more headroom. But then here's the beautiful part, Mrs. Pottery person. You need a website right now and you don't want to pay a lot of money. That totally makes sense. Everybody understands that. You're getting your business off the ground. If one day, though, your business does begin to blossom even more and you continue this, you are probably going to want to delegate some of these things like you would other stuff. and you're already going to be on a platform that is like extremely robust, and you have a lot of headroom, and you have a million people in this world that can handle that for you. I feel like that sentiment and that like customer journey and that thought process there might be something that could be ran with. I mean, I'm sure there's holes in that too.
Well, I mean that's how WordPress.com works now, right? So that's only a very recent change where they allowed plugins to be installed on WordPress.com hosting, because for years, if not a decade, and I don't know if it still is, WordPress.com was one massive WordPress multi-site install. That used to be a thing that all these developers used to talk about, how WordPress.com, the whole instance of WordPress.com, of everyone's website, was one multi-site install. Now, I don't know if that's still the same now that they support so many different pricing plans now, and now they support installs, plugin and theme installs. They even have staging. So for your typical $30 a month, you get your typical managed web hosting experience. Themes and plugins, staging sites, FTP access, GitHub connections, etc. And the staging site works pretty good. I used it the other day when I was relaunching the podcastsetup.com, So, and below $30 a month is the whole concept that you just illustrated. Start here. Start for free. If you just want a subdomain, janespottery.wordpress.com, go nuts. You'll have it on a subdomain, and you'll have a little WordPress.com ad. If you want to add a domain name to it, I think it's $100 for the year or something. I don't know. And you can put your domain and it removes the ad. And then if you want to install themes and plugins from the repo, then it's $30 a month. But why would you when Jetpack is there, right? From the very basic user.
Yeah. I mean, as an agency owner of somebody that could potentially be doing business with that person in 3 to 5 years, I'm kind of like holding back throw up in the sense of like what I'd have to do to kind of make sure everything is on par there. But at least everything would be on the same place. Everything would be, they would already kind of know like WordPress a little bit. They would already have the data there. I'm sure I could move, the data, like I guess, I don't know what that would be hosted with or where that domain is actually necessarily registered at. But my point is like, at least they're kind of in the sphere, you know what I mean? Rather than being over at a Wix or a Squarespace and they're like, oh, we've been paying Squarespace, we've been paying Wix. And then I have to come in and tell them, no, WordPress is actually, the way to go as you continue to scale. So I don't know. I just feel like if that could be the sentiment where kind of push them and educate them that way, because they're not going to know the difference. They're not going to know the difference at first. And it's not going to matter really which way they go. It's just like later down the line, if most people are in agreement that WordPress is the place to end up for most things, obviously maybe not everything, I guess, then yeah, I just feel like that's an option for the marketing portion of it or the messaging.
Yeah, I mean, this is .com. This is why Automattic.com should befriend us more, right? They should be more friendly with us, because I would probably also argue that there's a lot of us in the space that are some of the biggest referrers to the Squarespaces and Wixes of the world. Because we know, like when a person comes up to you and you're like, in the back of your head, you're like, no way you're going to be able to run WordPress, and I ain't teaching you, right? So go use this Wix and Squarespace thing, because you don't want them mad at you either to be like, you told me to use WordPress, I couldn't figure it out. It's like, yeah, because you need professional help. So they should be thinking, oh yeah, .com is getting better. And I hinted at this in my last article that I published yesterday on Sunday. The request for the traditional WordPress admin on WordPress.com, WP admin, right? Just to have it look and operate just like a WordPress install. There was a beta request form that you could fill out and request access to that. And my theory is, yeah, because maybe hopefully maybe more developers are starting to use WordPress.com and refer WordPress.com more now that you can install themes and plugins for $30 a month, which is industry on par average managed web hosting, $30 a month to do that stuff. Whereas years ago, you were like, not a couple of years ago, you were just like, Wix and Squarespace. I would have loved to be able to tell people for the last decade that I've been referring to Wix and Squarespace to use WordPress.com. Now I can, because themes and plugins. And guess what? You should also be excited for the data liberation project for migrating into WordPress from WordPress to WordPress, because yes, if more people are using WordPress.com and a customer comes to you and they're on WordPress.com and they're like, I want a custom site, you can be like, okay, if there is limitation on WordPress.com, you could pull that and go to your favorite web host with it because of whatever challenges you might be having with .com, and port it right over and start building in your favorite, environment / host. So that's it for today's episode. Get the weekly newsletter at thewpminute.com/subscribe. Want to support the show and join a Slack group filled with WordPress professionals like you? Talk about the news, share your WordPress business content, and network with others. Head to thewpminute.com/support and get access to our group. Support the show for as little as $5 or more if you feel we provided more value. Thanks to our pillar sponsors, Pressable, Bluehost, and OmniSend. Thanks to our Foundation Plus sponsors, WP World, Image SEO, and Hostinger. Thanks to all of our annual supporting members and you, the listener. Without your support, the WP Minute wouldn't be possible. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.